People used to describe me with words like strong, reliable, put together. I smiled when they said it, because that's what I was supposed to do. On the outside, my life looked fine. A decent home in a quiet American suburb. A marriage that looked stable. A family that relied on me. From the outside, nothing seemed broken. But no one ever asked how it felt to live inside my body. My name doesn't really matter. What matters is that my story sounds like 1,000 other women's stories, the kind we don't tell out loud because they don't seem dramatic enough to justify the pain. I grew up learning early that love was conditional. My parents weren't cruel, but they were distant. My father worked long hours. My mother was always overwhelmed. I learned quickly that being easy made life smoother for everyone. So I became helpful, quiet, responsible. I didn't cry much. I didn't complain. I learned how to read moods before words were spoken. I learned how to shrink my needs so others wouldn't feel burdened. By the time I reached adulthood, being strong wasn't a choice, it was my identity. I married young, not because I was deeply in love, but because it felt safe, predictable, like the next right step. My husband wasn't a bad man. That's important to say. He worked hard. He showed up physically. He paid bills. He never hit me, never screamed, never cheated. And somehow, that made it harder to admit something was missing. Because how do you explain loneliness when nothing is technically wrong? In the early years, I told myself this was what marriage looked like. Two people working, raising kids, getting through life. Passion fades, romance settles. That's normal, right? So I adapted. I became the planner, the organizer, the emotional center of the family. I remembered birthdays, school deadlines, doctor appointments. I noticed when the kids were quiet, when something felt off. I carried the invisible weight of keeping everything running. And I told myself I was lucky. But late at night, after everyone was asleep, I'd lie in bed staring at the ceiling, feeling a tightness in my chest I couldn't name. It wasn't sadness exactly. It was emptiness. I missed being seen, not praised, not thanked, seen. I missed having someone ask me how I was and actually wait for the answer. When I tried to talk about it, I didn't have the language. I'm just tired, I'd say. Or, I think I'm overwhelmed. My husband would nod, suggest I rest more, maybe take a weekend off. He thought the problem was fatigue, but the problem was deeper. I was exhausted from being invisible. Days blurred together. Wake up, make breakfast, go to work, come home, cook, clean, repeat. My life felt like an endless list of responsibilities, and I was checking them off efficiently, while slowly disappearing inside. Sometimes I caught my reflection in the mirror and felt disconnected from the woman staring back. She looked fine, normal, capable, but her eyes looked dull. I remember one moment clearly, a small moment that shouldn't have mattered, but did. I had just gotten a promotion at work, something I'd worked hard for. I came home excited, waiting for acknowledgement. I told my husband, expecting a smile, maybe a hug. He said, "That's great. Did you remember to call the plumber?" That was it. No celebration, no curiosity, no pride. And something inside me sank. That night, I cried quietly in the bathroom so no one would hear. Not because of the promotion, because I realized my achievements existed in a vacuum. I could succeed, struggle, hurt, and still be emotionally alone. I started noticing how often I minimized myself, how often I said, "It's fine," when it wasn't, how often I apologized for having feelings, how often I put everyone else first without even thinking. I told myself this was love, but love shouldn't erase you. Still, I stayed, because leaving felt selfish, because nothing was wrong enough, because women like me are taught to endure, not disrupt, and because I was afraid of what would happen if I finally admitted the truth, that I was unhappy in a life I worked so hard to build. I didn't know yet that this was only the beginning. I didn't know yet that my body would eventually demand what my voice refused to say. I didn't know yet that survival mode has an expiration date. All I knew was that something inside me was quietly breaking and no one seemed to notice, including me. By the time I realized something was wrong, it had already been wrong for a long time. The problem wasn't one big moment. It was 1,000 small ones. Moments where I swallowed words. Moments where I chose peace over honesty. Moments where I told myself, this is just life. I was the emotional backbone of my family and everyone leaned on me. My children came to me with their fears, their questions, their tears. I held space for them even when I felt empty. I listened. I reassured. I showed up. At work, people relied on me too. I was dependable, calm under pressure, the one who fixed things quietly without needing recognition. And at home, my husband leaned on me in ways he never noticed. I was the one who remembered his mother's birthday, the one who scheduled the kids' dentist appointments, the one who noticed when the house felt tense and tried to soften it. I carried the mental load, the invisible labor no one sees but everyone benefits from. And no one ever asked how heavy it was. At family gatherings, people would say things like, "You're so lucky, you have it all together. I don't know how you do it." I smiled every time, but inside, I felt like screaming, because what they called strength felt like suffocation. I didn't feel admired, I felt trapped. Trapped in the role of the woman who could handle everything. When I tried to explain my exhaustion, the responses were always the same. "You're just stressed. All moms feel this way. At least your husband isn't abusive. You should be grateful." Grateful. That word became a weapon I used against myself. Every time I felt unhappy, I reminded myself of everything I should appreciate. And every time, my feelings shrank a little more. My marriage grew quieter. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, the disconnected kind. We talked logistics, schedules, bills, kids. We didn't talk about dreams anymore, or fears, or how lonely it felt to sleep next to someone who didn't really see you. When I tried to reconnect emotionally, it felt awkward, like speaking a language we had forgotten. Sometimes I'd ask, "Are you happy?" He'd say, "Of course. Why wouldn't I be?" That answer made me feel even more alone. Because if he was happy, then the problem had to be me. I began to doubt myself. Maybe I was too sensitive, too emotional, too needy. So I tried harder. I became more patient, more accommodating, less demanding. I laughed at jokes that didn't feel funny. I avoided conversations that might cause discomfort. I made myself smaller so life could stay smooth. And slowly, resentment crept in. Not loud resentment, quiet, corrosive resentment. I resented being the default parent. I resented being the emotional caretaker. I resented being needed but not cherished. And then I resented myself for resenting him. I started feeling guilty for wanting more from a man who wasn't doing anything wrong. But emotional absence leaves marks too. They're just harder to explain. One night, after a long day, I sat alone in my car in the driveway. I didn't want to go inside. The house felt heavy, like stepping back into a role I couldn't remove. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, wondering how my life became something I needed breaks from. That thought scared me. I realized I hadn't felt joy in a long time, not real joy, just brief distractions. I wasn't living, I was functioning. And functioning is not the same as being fulfilled. I started waking up with anxiety, a tight chest, shallow breaths, a constant sense of pressure. Doctors said I was healthy. Probably stress, they said. But stress doesn't explain the emptiness. Stress doesn't explain why I felt like crying in grocery store aisles, or why I felt disconnected from my own life. I knew something had to change, but I didn't know how. Leaving felt impossible. Staying felt unbearable. I was standing at the edge of a truth I wasn't ready to face yet. A truth that would eventually force me to choose between comfort and self-preservation. And I was terrified of what choosing myself might cost. The breaking point didn't come with shouting or slammed doors. It came quietly on a Tuesday morning I barely remember except for how it made me feel. I was standing in the bathroom, brushing my teeth, staring at my reflection. My hair was pulled back in a messy bun. Dark circles sat under my eyes. My face looked tired in a way sleep couldn't fix. I remember thinking, is this it? Is this who I am now? The woman in the mirror looked like someone who had given everything away and kept nothing for herself. That thought followed me all day. At work, I couldn't focus. At home, I moved through routines like a ghost. I answered questions, cooked dinner, helped with homework. But inside, something was unraveling. That night, after the kids went to bed, my husband sat on the couch watching TV while I folded laundry beside him. I watched him laugh at something on the screen and felt an unexpected surge of anger. Not because he was laughing, because I hadn't felt joy like that in years and he hadn't noticed. I turned off the TV. "What's wrong?" he asked, annoyed. I hesitated. I almost backed down like I always did, but something inside me snapped. "I'm not okay," I said. He sighed. "We've talked about this." "No," I replied, my voice shaking. "We haven't." Words poured out of me, messy, unpolished, honest. I told him how lonely I felt, how invisible, how exhausted, how I felt like I was disappearing inside a life that looked perfect from the outside. He listened, but not the way I needed. He defended himself, explained, rationalized. I work hard. I'm here, aren't I? I don't understand what you want. And suddenly, I realized something devastating. He truly didn't see the problem. And maybe he never would. I stopped talking, not because I was finished, but because I felt foolish for hoping he'd finally understand. That night, I cried in the shower so no one would hear me. The water hid the sound of my sobs, but it couldn't hide the truth rising inside me. I couldn't keep living like this. The next few weeks were heavy. I went through the motions while feeling detached from my own life. I started having panic attacks, sudden waves of fear that left me breathless, shaking, convinced something terrible was about to happen. Doctors said it was anxiety, but anxiety is often the body's way of screaming when the mind refuses to listen. One afternoon, I picked my kids up from school and felt overwhelmed by guilt. They deserved a happy mother, a present mother, and I wasn't sure I could be that woman anymore if I kept pretending. That night, after everyone was asleep, I sat alone in the dark living room and finally admitted something I'd been avoiding for years. I was deeply unhappy. Saying it out loud felt like a betrayal of my marriage, my family, the life I was supposed to appreciate, but it also felt like relief. I started therapy soon after. The first session, I cried the entire time, not because I was weak, but because no one had ever given me permission to be honest. The therapist asked me simple questions that felt terrifying. When did you stop feeling like yourself? What are you afraid would happen if you chose your own needs? Who are you without the roles you play? I didn't have answers, but I knew one thing. I couldn't go back to pretending. I tried one last time to reach my husband, not with blame, but with vulnerability. I need emotional connection, I told him. I need to feel seen. He looked overwhelmed, confused. I don't know how to give that, he said. And in that moment, I understood something painful but freeing. Love without emotional presence is still loneliness. I wasn't angry at him. I was grieving the realization that the life I built could not give me what I needed to survive emotionally. I began imagining a future where nothing changed. The same silence, the same loneliness, the same slow erasure. And that future terrified me more than starting over ever could. For the first time, I allowed myself to ask the question I'd avoided for years. What if staying is what's hurting me? That question changed everything. Leaving didn't feel brave. It felt terrifying. People like to romanticize the idea of choosing yourself, but no one talks about the grief that comes with it. The fear, the guilt, the doubt that creeps in late at night and whispers that maybe you're making a mistake. When I finally accepted that my marriage could not give me what I needed emotionally, I didn't feel empowered. I felt like I was failing my husband, failing my children, failing the version of myself who believed endurance was the same thing as strength. The decision didn't happen all at once. It came in pieces, in the quiet moments when I realized I felt more at peace alone than together. In therapy sessions where I finally said, I don't know who I am anymore. In sleepless nights where I imagined another decade of silence and felt my chest tighten with panic. I tried to stay longer. I really did. I tried to convince myself that wanting emotional connection was asking for too much, that I should be grateful, that this was just how life was supposed to feel. But my body kept telling the truth my mouth avoided. The anxiety didn't stop. The emptiness didn't fade. The numbness only grew. And then one day, something small but powerful happened. I was driving alone, music playing softly, when I suddenly felt calm, not distracted, not productive, just present. It was the first moment of peace I'd felt in years, and I realized something heartbreaking. I only felt like myself when no one needed anything from me. That realization shattered me, because it meant I had been living my life in service of everyone else, while slowly abandoning myself. I knew then that staying wasn't neutral. Staying was choosing comfort over truth. Staying was teaching my children that silence is survival. Staying was slowly disappearing. So I made the hardest decision of my life. I chose honesty over appearance. I chose healing over familiarity. I chose myself even though it hurt. Telling my husband was painful, not dramatic, just heavy. There were tears, confusion, long pauses where neither of us knew what to say. I don't hate you, I told him, but I can't keep living like this. He looked broken, and so did I. But sometimes two people can care deeply and still not be able to meet each other where it matters most. Telling the kids was even harder. I worried they'd blame me, that I'd scar them, that they'd remember me as the one who broke the family. But children see more than we think. They saw how sad I'd been, how tired, how quiet. And slowly, as time passed, they saw something else too. They saw me breathe again. Healing wasn't instant. There were lonely nights where doubt crept in, financial stress, moments where I missed the familiarity of my old life. But there was also something new. Peace, quiet mornings without heaviness, laughter that came naturally, a growing sense of self I hadn't felt since childhood. Therapy helped me unlearn everything I was taught about womanhood. That being strong doesn't mean being silent. That love shouldn't cost you your identity. That sacrificing yourself is not the same as being selfless. I began setting boundaries, clumsy ones at first, saying no without explaining, asking for what I needed, allowing myself to rest without guilt. And slowly, I stopped measuring my worth by how useful I was to others. I started asking myself questions I'd avoided my entire life. What do I want? What brings me peace? Who am I without obligation? I'm still answering those questions. Healing isn't a finish line. It's a practice. Some days, old patterns resurface. The urge to overgive, to apologize for existing, to make myself smaller. But now, I notice, and that awareness has changed everything. If you are listening to this story and feeling a knot in your chest, please hear this. You are not selfish for wanting emotional connection. You are not weak for feeling exhausted. You are not ungrateful for admitting your pain. You are human, and you deserve a life where you don't have to disappear to keep the peace. Questions for you: comment below. Have you ever stayed in a situation because it looked good from the outside? Have you ever felt lonely inside your own family or marriage? At what point does being strong turn into self-betrayal? What would choosing yourself look like right now? Your story matters too. Share your thoughts in the comments. You never know who needs to hear they're not alone. Subscribe for more true stories if this story touched you. Subscribe for more real, emotional stories about women, healing, and resilience. New stories, real lives, deep truth. Thank you for listening.